Make my developmentally disabled boy cry? Yeah, buddy, you're losing your entire family. My former boss is the worst human being I've ever met. He did all sorts of things to mess with anyone he didn't like. So a while ago I was at a family event in a local park, walking with a young boy from our family who is developmentally disabled with Down syndrome, Ben. Ben does fairly well all things considered, but he's always been sensitive to anyone making fun of the way he looks or his condition. We are just having a good time on our little stroll, Ben and I both enjoying the day. Along comes my boss walking toward us. I'll call him Rob. I cringe at seeing him but smile and say hello to play nice. Rob, there's something you don't see every day. A pair of ugly retards walking together. Ben bursts into tears as Rob laughs and walks off. I deal with Ben and ignore Rob. I'm super pissed and trying to calm Ben down because for a few minutes he was totally distraught. Finally I get Ben to focus on how he has me and a lot of other awesome friends and family and that Rob is a stranger and what he thinks doesn't matter. We walked some more and I saw that Rob was at the park with his wife and teen daughter having a cookout and he had apparently been on his way back to his family from a trip to the toilet when he saw us. Back to being super pissed. I went back to our gathering and talked to an adult cousin of mine, Jake, telling him what happened. Jake wanted to get revenge on Rob, but I reminded him that this was my boss. I didn't want Rob to be able to know the revenge had anything to do with me because then he'd make my work life even worse than he already had. So Jake asked me for anything I knew about Rob that might help. I told Jake a bunch of things about Rob, but the relevant info here is that Rob liked to drink a particular kind of locally made beer at a certain bar. Rob had talked of having drank there on the previous Friday night while his wife and daughter were away visiting her family. Also, Rob had recently told a story at work about his wife's obsession with a particular little green fictional character. Let's call it Yabby Boda. Turns out his wife kept a stuffed Yabby Boda on their bed at all times. I wasn't there for the revenge setup itself because I didn't want Rob to see me, but Jake filled in the details afterward. It was basically this. Jake approached Rob and put an arm around his shoulders and tried to kiss him. Rob pushes him off. Rob, what are you doing? Rob's family is now paying attention. Jake, I am just so excited to see you, sweetie. Friday night was so amazing. Rob, what are you talking about? Jake, seriously, you're going to act like you don't remember now? I know you were a bit tipsy after all of those specific local beers at the local bar, but certainly you remember what happened later. Rob, nothing happened later, or ever. I don't even know your name. Jake, really? You were screaming it on Friday. Rob, turning red, you lying son of a. Rob's wife, interrupting. Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is my husband. I'm sure you have him mistaken for someone else. Please just leave us alone. Jake, oh no, I'm not mistaken. We had the best intimacy ever on Friday night and now he's acting like he doesn't even know me. Rob's wife, I told you, this is my husband. You're mistaken. Jake, oh, maybe I am. I guess it was someone else who took me back to his place on Rob Street and had great intimacy with me on the bed right next to Yabby Boda. Sorry. Jake turns and walks away. Rob's wife, oh my god, Rob, what the F is wrong with you? You're gay now? Really? Already long story made a bit shorter. Rob's wife wasn't real happy with him anyway and this was apparently the tipping point that made her file for divorce soon thereafter. Rob frequently complained at work in the following months about how he didn't care about his wife but really missed his daughter and how much it sucked to live in his new place compared to his old home. Every time he complained about his lack of a home life at work, I knew he did it to himself when he was mean to a developmentally disabled kid. The best part is he never figured out I was involved at all. Cops, what is the most what the FCK happened here moment you've experienced? My firefighter uncle's story. His truck was sent on a call for an unknown disturbance, which basically means anything in the world. They get sent an address and that's pretty much it. Truck drives down the street looking for this address and they get to the end and all they can see is an abandoned lot with nothing but bushes. Even though they can't see anyone they have to get out and investigate, so my uncle and a couple of the guys get out of the truck and start walking around with the usual, fire department, call out. They didn't hear anything for a while and were about to pack it in as another pointless prank call when my uncle walked past a bush and heard rustling. He looks over and sees a man standing kind of awkwardly behind a bush. Hey Mr. Fireman, did you call 911? Uncle, yes sir. My uncle steps a bit closer and realizes how the man is buck-ass naked and standing at a strange angle. He motions to another firefighter that he found the caller and goes behind the bush to begin assessing. He is a firefighter/paramedic. That's when he realizes that the man has what he refers to, a effing bunny tail on his butt. Of course they try to get the man to explain why he had called in distress and what was going on. After a bit of avoidance the man finally admits that he had taken a toilet brush cleaner and shoved the handle up his bum. Honestly no idea why anyone would think this is a good idea generally. Being the enlightened individual that he is, he chose one with a hook on the end, to hang up in a bathroom. What my uncle and the other firefighters assumed was that the hook had gotten stuck on something internally because they couldn't pull it out and it caused the man significant discomfort when they tried. My uncle left the man with another firefighter, getting his information, and went back to the truck to call for an ambulance. Of course at this point he always mentions that he walked around the truck to see the rest of the company trying to silently die of laughter out of view of the bushes. When the ambulance arrives my uncle meets them with a grin on his face and tells them to brace themselves before walking them over to the bushes. They assess the man and conclude that there is no way for them to remove the toilet brush in the field and that they have to admit him to the hospital for surgery. The only problem was that they couldn't figure out how to get him into the gurney without causing him to move in a way that caused him more pain. They end up throwing a blanket over him and the firefighters help maneuver him into a sort of downward dog/mountain position with his bum in the air to keep the toilet brush at the right angle. At that point my uncle decided that the fire department was done with the call and the paramedics could handle it from there and loaded up the company onto the truck. As they began to drive away he said they were loading this guy into the rig as we drove off and the last I saw of him was that blanket falling off and that damn bunny tail of his sticking straight up in the air. Landlord is jealous of my income, raises my rent $500. I screw him years later for $20,000. In the late 90s wife and I were just married, just getting started, and we decided to dink, double income, no kids, it for a few years to save up for a down payment on a house. The dot-com bubble was still rising and I was a newly minted software developer. I had an entry-level job for a while and then got recruited to a new city and a new job that paid 3x what I was making before. It was an offer too good to pass up. I ran the numbers and it was a no-brainer. By living frugally and saving my entire salary, living off just her income, we would easily have enough in a year to put 20% down payment on a new house. We rented an apartment in the new city that was listed for $950 a month. The landlord was a real estate agent who owned a 2-bedroom condo as an investment property. Let's call him Hank Wazowski. Hank was a thin, gray, no-nonsense guy. He was pleasant enough, but perfunctory, dry, and had no sense of humor. He made a point of explaining that under no circumstances was he responsible for maintaining the garbage disposal and that it was not included in the rental agreement and he would not be responsible for fixing it were it to break. Okay. He seemed slightly amused by us, a clueless, young, newlywed couple, but I could tell he wanted to rent to us because we were very obviously a safe choice as renters. We filled out the rental agreement and the credit check, and this is where my troubles began. Hank looked hard at the credit application where I listed my job title, software developer, and my income, $75,000. For a 23-year-old in his second year out of college, in the late 1990s, this is a small fortune. Throw in my wife's salary and we were over 6 figures in income, renting an apartment far beneath our means. Like I said, dink is the way to go when starting out. I can't believe how much money you make, Hank must have said half a dozen times, muttering under his breath. I explained we were saving to buy a house and that we were only going to stay in the apartment a year. We might stay a few months after the term is over. Would month to month be okay after a year? Hank assured us that would be fine. We saw Hank only once during the year and he again mentioned my salary and how he couldn't believe that's what software developers were making. It was awkward and I gave a vague reply. Anyway, a year later we had found a house to buy, signed all the papers, and were making plans to move. The new house wasn't going to be ready until 2 months after our rental lease was up, so I called Hank to ask if we could, as discussed, simply extend the lease by 2 months before moving out. Hank assured me on the phone it would be no problem and he would send over an extension for us to sign. The extension arrived in the mail and it included a month-to-month clause and a $500 increase in the rent. I flipped out and called him. Hank, why are you increasing the rent over 50%? That's too much. That's more than my new mortgage is going to be. He was super condescending to me, saying, Mr. My last name, it's what the apartment is for now. I would be losing money by renting it for less. I tried to reason with him but it was very clear he knew we could afford the $500, had no choice in the matter, and he was going to screw us over as best he could. He got angry with me for arguing my point, and I'll never forget his parting words. You don't have to like it, Mr. My last name, you just have to pay for it. My wife and I tried to figure out a way to move out early by putting our furniture in storage for a couple months and crashing with friends, but it just wasn't going to work out. I swallowed my pride and wrote out the check for $1,450 for the extra month. A month later I wrote a similar check, and then we moved out. I made sure the apartment was spotless before moving, but still Hank withheld $300 from our security deposit for bullshit things that were just a way for him to squeeze a few more dollars from the kids who made too much money. $100 for cleaning? Sure, but $300 was obscene. In my mind, he had screwed me over for $1,200 and there was nothing I could do about it. What made it even more infuriating is that I saw the ad Hank put in the paper after we moved out and he listed the apartment for rent at only $150 more than we had been paying originally, not the grossly inflated $500 increase. And it didn't rent. A month later I saw the same ad and he had lowered the price to $75 more than we had been paying, and I assume it got rented since the ad stopped appearing. Fast forward about 5 years. Life is good, the house is good, we have a baby, and even though the dot-com bubble has burst, I'm still employed. One day, out of the blue, I overhear one of my coworkers, Phil, a senior developer, talking to the guy working the reception desk. Hey, Mike, I'm expecting someone to drop off some paperwork for me. If Hank Wazowski asks for me, tell him I'll be right out. I freeze and get a taste of bile in my mouth remembering how I had to write out that name on those checks all those years ago. There's no way it's the same guy, right? I walk over to Phil who is still by the reception desk. Phil, I say, how do you know that name? Hank Wazowski. Phil explains that Hank is his real estate agent. I bought my condo through him several years ago. I'm selling my condo now so I can buy a house. So I'm going to ask him to be my agent again. Do you know him? I told Phil that I used to rent an apartment from Hank and described what he looks like. Phil confirms the description. It's the same guy. Wow, small world, right? And on cue, right then the front door to the office opens and in walks Hank Wazowski. I stare in disbelief. He's carrying a folder of papers and doesn't recognize me. Phil and Hank shake hands and they talk for a few moments. I stand there silently, wondering what to do. Phil finally says, Hank, this is my friend my name, I think you may have already met? Yes, hello Hank, good to see you again. My wife and I were your tenants a few years ago on Street. Remember, the software developer who rented for a year saving to buy a house? Well, this is where I work. Here, with Phil. Hank's eyes indicate he now remembers me, and he's starting to put it all together. We shake hands and he says yes. Of course he remembers and asks how we are doing. Oh, we're just fine, thanks for asking. Phil says that you're his real estate agent. Small world, isn't it? Hank nods pleasantly. He still doesn't remember the details of our last conversation. I do some quick math in my head. This is the mid-2000s. The real estate market is very strong and easy money for any agent. The crash of 2008 is still a few years in the future. I start to think out loud. Selling the condo for around $150 to $200,000. And you're looking at houses in the $500,000 range, so that's $650 to $700,000 in total transactions. An agent getting 3% on the sale and the purchase is getting around 20 grand for his trouble. That's a good commission for the agent, isn't it? Hank's eyes flash and I can tell he remembers everything about me now. Phil is surprised at my passive-aggressive tone. I am enjoying the uncomfortable silence. Hank deflects my question, saying it's complicated, and tells Phil to send back the papers as soon as possible. He shakes hands with Phil, looks at me, nods, and goes to leave. It was really good to see you again, Hank. I call behind him. He exits the building. As the door is still shutting, I say a bit too loudly, so that Hank can hear, Phil, don't sign anything just yet, I have a story to tell you. Phil looks at me and says, my name, what the hell was that all about? He looks pissed and confused at my behavior. I tell Phil the whole story, the rent, the $500 increase, the security deposit, you don't have to like it, you just have to pay it, everything. Phil, you can't use this guy to sell your condo and buy a house. I hate him, he's evil, I'll help you find another real estate agent, just use anyone but Hank. So the great thing about Phil is that, well, he's a great guy. He says he's a little surprised at my story and has always known Hank as a straightforward guy, but I totally see him doing that to you, he admits. There's no way I could use him now. What a dick. Then Phil's eyes lit up a bit. What do you want me to say when I fire him? I have special feelings for Phil now. We came up with a plan and I made sure there were some key phrases in Phil's repertoire. We planned it all out together in advance. My only regret is that I didn't get to see Hank's reaction in person a day later when Phil made the following phone call while I stood behind him listening. Hi, Hank? It's Phil calling. Yeah, about that. I've decided to get some other quotes from other agents. I'm not going to sign up with you. Pause. No, you shouldn't give a discount. You'd be losing money if you did that. Pause. No, this is just a decision I've made. No, it has nothing to do with my name. Pause. Well, you don't have to like it, Hank. You just have to accept it. Goodbye. Click, and it was the greatest revenge I could have ever imagined. Through a chance meeting years later, Hank got screwed out of $20,000 in easy commissions. And the best part is Hank absolutely knew it had everything to do with my name.